So first things first, the basic rules when it comes to radical and exponential transformations. So first of all, f of x equals the nth root of a. That's how it's read as the nth root of a. So when we do these, we're going to be dealing with fractional powers. All right, so we're going to have three pieces. We're going to have a root on the radical, which we use n to denote. We have an a inside, or sometimes it's called b, like a base. And then we have an m as a power outside. So everybody okay with how to read this? Right, so it's the nth root. So if there was a 4 up there, it'd be the fourth root of a. Okay, so make sure that you're okay with the language. Now we have two basic setups here. One is the situation where the n is even, and the other is when n is odd. So when n is even, it's the same rules as our square roots, right? And what that means is that you're always going to get two answers when you take an even root. You're going to get the plus or minus sign. Okay, the other rule is that a needs to be greater than or equal to 0. We cannot even root negative numbers, right? You can't square root a negative, you can't fourth root a negative, eighth root, 264th root. Anything that's an even n, it needs to be a positive inside. And who remembers what happens if you put a negative inside an even root? I. Okay, so if a is negative and you have an even root, then you're going to use the I. Everybody okay with that? Yes or no? So it's basically the same rules we've been working with when it comes to square roots. Those rules are actually true for all even roots. So now if n is odd, we're actually only going to get one answer. Okay, it's either positive or it's negative. It can never be both. A can be any value from negative infinity to infinity. So we can odd root positives or negatives without worry. Okay? And then for an odd root, if a is a negative value, then we get a negative answer. So if we have a negative inside the radical and it's an odd root, then we're going to get a negative answer. If a is positive inside an odd root, then we're going to get a positive answer. The main thing here is the signs, right? If you have an even root, you need to include the plus or minus. If you have an odd root, the sign on the answer will match the sign of the a inside the radical. Okay, if you put a plus or minus that doesn't belong, minus half a point. If you forget the plus or minus, then it should be there at minus half a point. So you'll have to be very careful when you evaluate that you have the right signage. So if I asked you to find the fifth root of negative 32, first of all, is this an odd root or an even root? Odd. So that means that the sign on my answer is going to match the sign of a. So what's my a, positive or negative? So my answer is negative. And then just in general, what's the fifth root of 32? What number times itself 5 times will get you 32? 2. Right, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. Okay, what about for the cube root of 125? Is my answer going to be a positive or a negative? Positive, and what is the cube root of 125? You guys should know this. You're supposed to have your perfect squares and perfect cubes memorized. 5. Okay, if you're sitting there and you're not sure how I'm coming up with these, you can use your calculator as a guide. Again, I don't mean fifth root of negative 32. I mean, what's 2 to the 5th? Is it 32? If it's not, try 3 to the 5th. Try 4 to the 5th. Okay, so when you're not sure how to get these values, you start in the smallest number we have, which is 2, and then take it to the right power. Okay? So for me, I would take 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 and see what I get. Okay, here, if you don't know that 125 cubed, that 5 cubed is 125, you can go 2 times 2 times 2. That one doesn't work. 3 times 3 times 3, that doesn't work. 4 times 4 times 4, that won't work. 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. Okay, and this time I'm using 3 items because my root is 3. Okay, so the number outside tells you how many objects are being multiplied together. And you're trying to figure out what the actual object is. Square root of a negative 64. Can I square root a negative? No, because it's an even root. So how do I handle the negative? I need an I, right? So I get I square root of 64. And what is the square root of 64? Close, not 8, but plus or minus 8. So you get plus or minus 8i. So again, if you're dealing with an even root, you must include plus or minuses. So what's the fourth root of 16? So same thing, let's start with the signs. Is this going to be a positive, a negative, or is it going to be a plus or minus? It'll actually be a plus or minus because the root is even, right? So what is the fourth root of 16? So what number times itself 4 times will get you 16? 2. Okay, the other way you can do that is a fourth power means that we're like square rooting and then square rooting again, right? Because the square root is 2. So what's the square root of 16? 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. Okay, but that only works with even powers, or even roots, rather. Okay? So any major questions on those 4 problems? Yes, no, maybe? Yes, sir. Well, this is an even root, and we can't even root a negative, so I have to use the I. This is an odd root, and I can odd root negatives. Because what's negative 2 times negative 2? Basically, I'm taking negative 2 5 times, right? So what's a negative times a negative? So this becomes a positive. These 2 become a positive, and that leaves me with a negative, right? So what's a positive times a positive? Times a negative. I can do that. This one, I'm taking 2 items. Can I take 2 positives, multiply them together, and get a negative? No. Can I take 2 negatives, multiply them together, and get a negative? So that's why I have to use the I. Okay? So everybody all right with the basic evaluation side? Yes, no, maybe? So let's get into what we're actually going to be spending a lot of time on. Exponent. Okay, good. That's spelled right. So a lot of what we're going to be doing today is actually converting from exponential form to radical form. Does everybody recognize here that I have 3 parts, right? For an exponential, I need 2 key pieces. I need a base, and I need a power. Now, what do you recognize about my power? What's different about this power? What does it have? It's a fraction, right? So I have to find a place for all 3 pieces. So when I say radical form, what that really means is that I have to use the square root bracket. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to start. Can anybody tell me what number do you think goes inside? Is it the B, the M, or the N? B. The base is what goes inside the radical. Is M the root or is N the root? N, right? N is always going to be your root. Everybody okay with that? Yes or no? So what's left to go aside as a power? The M. So this is what we mean. So this is what a fractional power actually stands for. Is it's a root written in radical form. So these 2 items right here are actually equal to each other. So you can write it in either form. Both of these forms are exactly the same thing. Because what do you do when you take a power to a power? What do you do with the powers? Not add, but multiply. Does the order matter when you multiply? No. So I can put the M on the B and then take the root, or I can take the root and then multiply, or then raise to the power of M. Okay? So when we're evaluating these without a calculator, sometimes it's easier to root first, then power, and sometimes it's easier to power first and then root. Okay? But any major questions on exponential to radical form? Okay, so this is what we're going to be focusing on. So how would you write 16 to the 3 halves in radical form? So what's the root going to be? 2, right? What goes inside? And then outside. Okay, so just make sure that you're writing that power as a power. It needs to be written as a superscript. Okay, a lot of students lose points because you write it like that. That looks like a times 3 to me. Okay, if you mean it as a power, make sure it's written up above everything as a superscript. Okay? Now, do I really need this 2 here? No, because the second root is just a square root, right? There's no such thing as a first root for symbolic form. So if you put no root down, it's assumed to be a 2, okay? Everybody all right with that? So if I ask you to just convert, this is what you would leave, right? If I just said rewrite the statement in radical form, that's all you would put down. If I asked you to evaluate this, what is the square root of 16? Not just 4, but plus or minus 4, right? And then cubed. And what's plus or minus 4 cubed? So it's 4 cubed. (16 times 4, which is 64. All right, so everybody okay with that process, though? So this is where they ask you to rewrite, and this is where they ask you to evaluate. So it's all about what they're actually asking you to do. Make sure that you're answering the question being asked. So 32 to the negative 3/5. What does a negative power force me to do? So where does that base go? Up or down? Down. So I get 1 over my whatever, right? So what's the root? Okay, so the base is 32, right? What's the root? 5. And what's the power outside? 3. Okay. Anybody remember off the top of their heads, what's the fifth root of 32? What number times itself 5 times will get you a whole 32? 2. And what's 2 cubed? Yes, no? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so how would you solve this? What would be your first move if I wanted you to isolate x here? Okay, so order of operations, right? We have, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. When we evaluate, which way do I move? Do I go down the order of operations or do I move up the order of operations when I evaluate? You go down when you evaluate. When you solve, do I go down or do I go up? Up. So when I'm asking you to isolate a variable, you have to look first. Do I have anything being subtracted to the x here? No. Do I have anything being added? Do I have anything being divided with this? No. Do I have anything being multiplied with the x? Yes. So what's being multiplied with the x? The 4. So that's what I have to get rid of first. So how do you get rid of a 4? X to the 5th equals 32, right? And then how do I get x by itself? How do I get rid of a 5th power? Well, how would I get rid of a square? Square root. How do I get rid of a cube? Cube root. So how do you think I get rid of a 5th? 5th root. So I take the 5th root of both sides. So what happens to these two 5s? They cancel out, leaving me with just an x. And what is the 5th root of 32? Is it plus 2, minus 2, or plus or minus 2? It'll be just plus 2 because it's an odd root. Okay? Any major questions on that process? Yes or no? Yes. Whatever the A is. If this number inside is positive, your answer is positive. If this number is negative, it's negative. With even roots, this has to be a positive inside, and your answer will be the plus or minus.